She didn't have an Ivy League degree. She didn't have her family's support. And according to everyone at home, she didn't even have a real job. But while they laughed at her startup dreams, she was quietly writing the code that would change an entire industry. 5 years later, she owned penthouses, led a global tech company, and stayed hidden behind the title of a mysterious CEO no one had ever seen. Then Christmas Eve arrived, and her sister brought home an executive from the company she had just bought. One careless insult, one corporate phone call, and her secret life came crashing into the open.
My name's Chloe, I'm 32, and I secretly run an AI empire worth billions. To my family, I'm a total washout. They've spent years laughing at my ambitions and making me feel like an outcast. Tonight, at our holiday dinner, my sister Sophia just smirked as my mom told me I'd be sleeping in the drafty attic because her boss was getting the guest room. I could feel my hands trembling. For 5 whole years, Ivy swallowed their judgment and kept my success quiet. Little do they know, that's all about to change. Before I explain how I went from a freezing attic to blowing their minds, drop a comment where you're from and hit subscribe for more stories. I grew up just outside San Francisco, in a family obsessed with the old-fashioned idea of success. My parents, Catherine and Richard, had a very specific blueprint for achievement. You know the type. Elite universities, stable corporate jobs, and all the awards to prove it. My older sister, Sophia, who's 38, was their masterpiece. She hit every mark perfectly. She went to Stanford, got her MBA, and snagged a senior VP role at a major tech company, Stratton Global. Every holiday dinner was basically the Sophia show, celebrating her latest win. My younger brother, Marcus, who's 28, pretty much just followed in her footsteps. He became a project manager at a big consulting firm and just got a promotion. My parents couldn't have been prouder. And then there was me, the family puzzle they never solved. From the time I was 10, I was obsessed with how things worked, especially computers. While other kids were just playing games, I was trying to build them. I'd spend entire weekends in my room pulling apart old electronics and teaching myself to code. To my parents, it was just some weird hobby. Chloe, when are you going to join the debate team? My mom would sigh. You need more than just computers on a college application. That gap between me and my family only got bigger in high school. While Sophia was homecoming queen and captain of the debate team, I was starting a robotics club in a dusty storage room. My teachers called my ideas groundbreaking. My parents called it a lack of focus. You're always bouncing from one thing to another, my dad would say when I'd put aside a drone prototype to work on a new app. Why can't you stick with something like your sister does? They didn't understand that I wasn't just dropping projects. I was leveling up. Each project gave me a skill I needed for the next big idea. I thought college would change things. I went to business school mostly for them, but all my real energy went into my startup. By sophomore year, I knew I was onto something huge, a new kind of AI platform that was already getting attention from investors. So, I dropped out to focus on it full-time. My family's reaction? You would have thought I'd announced I was joining the circus. You're throwing your future away, my father told me, the disappointment thick in his voice. We didn't raise our daughter to be a quitter. And even if this little app of yours succeeds, what then, my mother chimed in. No stability, no pension, no future. Sophia was visiting that weekend, and she just gave me that condescending little smile I despised. It's okay, Mom. Not everyone's built for the real world. Some people need to fail first. From then on, it was constant. Every holiday was a performance of Sophia's latest triumph versus my latest phases. She'd arrive in her new convertible, talking about her huge team and her quarterly bonuses. My parents would show her off at gatherings, but would quickly steer the conversation away from me. Sophia just landed a massive 8-figure contract. My dad would tell everyone. Then someone would ask about me, and my mom would say, "Oh, Chloe is exploring her options." The final straw came at Thanksgiving 3 years ago. I had just secured my first $2 million in venture capital funding. I was buzzed. But as I started to tell them, Sophia cut me off to announce she'd been promoted to executive VP. "Oh, that's incredible, sweetie," my mother exclaimed, completely forgetting I was even talking. As they all toasted to Sophia's success, I decided I was done trying to impress them. From that moment on, I would keep my work completely secret. Let them believe I was failing. One day, they'd find out the truth on my terms. That night, I officially incorporated Aura AI. It started as a small startup, but quickly became an industry leader. Within 2 years, we had offices across the country. By the 3rd year, we were global. I was acquiring smaller tech firms and reinvesting every dollar back into the company, all while staying completely invisible. I chose to be an anonymous CEO, letting my COO handle all public appearances. It was a good strategy to keep the competition off balance, but the real reason was personal. I just couldn't face my family knowing the truth. Living two lives was exhausting. I owned a gorgeous loft overlooking the bay, but I told my family I was barely making rent on a tiny apartment. I'd show up to family dinners in a beat-up old Corolla, while my fleet of Teslas collected dust in a secure garage. They'd ask me when I planned to get a real job. On the same day, I'd just led a multi-billion-dollar board meeting. Then, 5 years after I dropped out of college, I made the biggest acquisition of my career. We bought Stratton Global, the company where Sophia had built her entire identity. The irony was almost too much to handle. My perfect older sister was about to start working for the family failure, and she didn't have a clue. The final papers landed on my desk a week before the holidays. I just stared at the Stratton logo, now sitting right below my own. It all led to this. The very institution that validated my sister's whole life was now my property. Should I prepare the internal memo for the Stratton employees? My executive assistant, Sarah, asked. I told her no. Wait until after New Year's. Let everyone have a peaceful holiday. The part I didn't say out loud was that I needed one last holiday playing by the old rules. One final dinner where I was the disappointment, and they were completely clueless. The family text came a few days later. Holiday dinner at 6. Let us know if you're coming. It was a summons, not an invitation. I texted back a simple, see you there, fighting the urge to just say no. After 5 years, I knew exactly how the night would go. It would be the usual script. Hours of Sophia's success stories, my parents' polite but obvious disappointment in me, and my brother Marcus silently agreeing with their judgment. I drove my rusty old sedan to their house, even though I had my choice of luxury cars. That old car was part of the act, but it was also my armor. It reminded me I wasn't there for their approval anymore. When I pulled up, there was a new Porsche parked in the driveway that I'd never seen before. Inside, it all made sense. Sophia had brought a +1, Gregory Vance, an executive vice president at Stratton Global, her boss, the man she was always trying to win over. Chloe, you remember Gregory, don't you? Sophia asked with a tone that implied I should. We'd never met. She was in a stunning designer dress that easily cost 3 months of my supposed rent. Gregory was next to her in a perfect suit, a gold watch flashing on his wrist. I don't think we've had the chance, I said, extending a hand. I had intentionally worn an old band t-shirt and jeans. Chloe, you're here, my mom called out from the kitchen. Come give me a hand with the salad. Sophia and Gregory are just chatting with your dad. And there it was. Within 30 seconds, I was a kitchen hand, and Sophia was the star of the show. I chopped onions and listened to the easy laughter from the living room. So, Gregory, how's the view from that new office? I heard my dad ask. Sophia tells me you can see the whole bay. It's not bad, Richard, but I've heard our mystery buyer has an even better one, Gregory answered. My hands paused over the cutting board. Yes, the view from my office on the top floor of the Aura AI tower was definitely better. You've met this new owner? My dad pressed. No one's met them, Sophia jumped in. It's like they don't exist. Just a name on an email making these massive changes from behind a curtain. Their face, I thought, a small smile playing on my lips. Chloe, how's that little app you're building coming along? My father shouted, suddenly recalling I was in the house. I nearly choked. My little app was the $5 billion company that had just bought hers. It's moving along, I said, keeping my voice steady. Sophia walked in and topped off her wine. Listen, I know things are tight. A junior developer role just opened up in one of our smaller departments. It's basic work, but it's a foot in the door. I could put in a good word, she said. The pity in her eyes was infuriating. She had no clue that her next performance review would eventually have to cross my desk. I appreciate it, but I'm good, I said quietly. Whatever you say. She shrugged, heading back to her audience. As I brought out the food, I heard my parents whispering in the hall. At least Ethan's law career is stable, my mother sighed. I just worry about Eva, 30, and still messing with those science projects. Chloe's tried to mentor her, my father chimed in. But you can't help someone who refuses to get a real job. The old jab still stung. My phone vibrated. A secure message from my COO about the Summit financial deal. Retention offers are drafted. Mark Dawson is on the list, per your instructions. A sharp, satisfied smile touched my lips. Mark had zero idea his career was in the hands of the woman chopping carrots across the table. The final straw came before dessert. I went to the hall to take a call and heard Chloe and my mother in the guest room. We've put Mark in here naturally, my mother said. Your father and I are in our room, Ethan's in his old room, and you have yours. So where does that leave Ava? Chloe asked, her voice dripping with fake concern. Well, the den is full of gifts, my mother said. I figured the garage would be fine. It's just for one night. Perfect, Chloe laughed. The garage is totally on brand for her. She must be used to roughing it in that little lab of hers. My blood ran cold. A garage in Boston. In December. Unheated. My hands shook with fury as I returned to the kitchen, my expression perfectly neutral. 5 years of building an empire while they mocked me, and my Christmas gift was a freezing garage. The dining room looked like a magazine cover. Crystal glasses gleamed next to the heirloom china on the lace tablecloth. It was a picture of holiday perfection, right down to the place cards that banished me to the far end of the table. My mother had seated Mark at the head, like a guest of honor, with my father opposite. Chloe was on Mark's right, my mother on his left, and Ethan sat beside his sister. I was in the corner, next to an empty chair, a perfect metaphor for my status in this family. To his credit, Mark looked a little awkward with the arrangement. He caught my eye a few times with a questioning look. "So, Ava," he finally asked, "what kind of biotech do you work on?" Before I could respond, Chloe let out a little laugh she tried to disguise as a cough. "Oh, Ava just tinkers with some lab projects," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "Nothing on the scale you're used to at Summit." "I run a firm specializing in genetic therapies," I said, looking directly at Mark. His expression shifted, a flicker of real interest in his eyes. "Seriously, that's a major growth sector. We're scouting acquisitions in that space right now. Whose platform do you use?" "Mark," Chloe interrupted, placing a hand on his arm. "Don't be a bore. Tell them about that new Tokyo fund." And just like that, the conversation spun away from me. I watched Mark pause, then pivot as Chloe prompted, launching into a story about his firm's international reach. My one moment of connection was gone. Dinner unfolded as it always did. Chloe held court with stories of her strategic wins and high-value clients. My parents listened, beaming with pride. Ethan would add his own courtroom victories, receiving the same warm approval. My attempts to contribute were met with polite silence before the topic was quickly changed. We had all perfected our roles. "This is incredible," Valerie, Mark said, finishing his roast. "You are an amazing cook." "Thank you, Mark," my mother replied, glowing. "It's just so lovely having the whole family together." "Speaking of," my father interjected, "we should figure out the sleeping situation. It's getting late." A knot formed in my stomach. This was it. "Mark, we've got the guest room all ready for you," my mother announced. "Fresh linens and everything. Chloe, you're in your old room, of course," my father added. "And Ethan's already set." Every head turned toward me, and I caught a flicker of unease on my parents' faces. "Ava," my mother began, her voice artificially cheerful. "We set you up in the garage. There's a camp bed and some extra blankets." I saw Chloe's lips curl into a smirk as Ethan suddenly found his dessert fork fascinating. "The garage has no heat," I stated, my voice flat. "You can plug in the old space heater," my father offered, as if this was a brilliant solution. "It'll be fine." Mark looked genuinely appalled. "The garage? But it's below freezing out there." "Ava won't mind," Chloe jumped in. "She's always been the resilient one, right, sis?" Her condescending tone made my skin crawl. In that instant, I knew she had planned this, bringing Mark home specifically to see me put in my place. "I'm sure there's another option," Mark started to say, looking uncomfortable. "It's fine," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. "I have to work late tonight anyway." After dinner, my mother led me to the garage to inspect my 5-star accommodations. It was even worse than I imagined. The room was packed with old furniture, dusty exercise equipment, and boxes of holiday junk. A flimsy camping cot sagged in the center. A pile of old quilts sat beside a tiny, ancient-looking space heater. "It's only for one night," my mother said again, not meeting my gaze. "And you're always buried in that laptop, so you'll hardly notice." I stayed silent as she hurried back inside to the warmth. The second the door clicked shut, I sat on the cot and pulled out my phone. The weather app read 25 degrees. It couldn't be much warmer in here. I opened my laptop and found an urgent flag from my board. They needed my final sign-off on the Summit financial acquisition before the markets opened. At 9 a.m., an email would hit every single inbox, including Chloe's and Mark's, announcing Lyra Dynamics as their new owner. It would also name me as the CEO. As I scanned the final documents, an idea began to take shape. Why wait until morning? Why not own this story right now? My phone buzzed again. A text from my assistant. "Ready to push the executive briefing tonight if you say the word. All department heads at Summit will get it instantly." I glanced at the time, 8:30 on Christmas Eve. Mark and Chloe would both get that alert. Mark's reaction would be impossible for him to hide. My finger hovered over the reply button. 5 years. 5 years of their casual cruelty. Was I really going to let them put me in a freezing garage on Christmas Eve? The side door creaked open, and Mark stepped in, looking guilty. "Hey, sorry to barge in," he said. "I just wanted to check on you. This is really not okay." Before I could reply, his phone buzzed loudly. Then it buzzed again and again, a cascade of notifications. He frowned, pulling it out. That's weird. Urgent alerts from the board on Christmas Eve. He opened the first message, and his face went from confused to completely stunned. This says Summit has been acquired by Lyra Dynamics, he stammered, his eyes finding mine. Effective immediately. But that's impossible. We would have known. His phone rang and he answered on the first ring. Mark Dawson, yes. I'm just seeing the emails now. No, I had no idea. The CEO wants to speak with me tonight on Christmas Eve. As he listened, his eyes widened and he slowly turned to stare at me. He was finally truly seeing me. The pieces clicked into place in his mind. She is right here, he whispered into the phone, his voice tight with disbelief. The garage suddenly felt arctic as Mark stared, phone glued to his ear. I could just make out my CO's voice asking if he was with Ava Chen, the CCO of Lyra Dynamics. I think so, Mark replied, his gaze locked on mine. I held out my hand for the phone. May I? He passed it over like he was in a trance. The moment felt surreal, sitting on a rickety cot in my parents' freezing garage, about to detonate 5 years of their narrative. David, I said, my voice sharp and clear, a tone my family had never once heard. Yes, I'm here with Mark. The timeline has moved up. Please proceed with the full board announcement tonight. We'll handle the all-staff email tomorrow. I could practically hear David's confusion. Tonight, ma'am, it's Christmas Eve. I'm aware of the date, I said, watching the color drain from Mark's face. Circumstances have changed. Please proceed immediately. After I hung up, I handed the phone back to Mark. He took it like it was radioactive. You're the CEO of Lyra, he said, more to himself than to me. You acquired Summit. I did, I replied, closing my laptop. But he gestured weakly at our surroundings. The garage, the camp bed, the tiny heater losing its battle against the Boston winter. Sleeping in the garage on Christmas, I finished for him. Yes, it seems I am. The door from the house flew open and my sister Chloe stood there, her own phone in her hand. Her face was pale. Mark, are you seeing these emails? Something's happening at the firm. They're saying we were acquired by her words choked off as she saw the expression on Mark's face, then followed his stunned gaze to me. What is going on here? Perhaps we should take this inside, I suggested, rising from the cot. It's getting quite cold out here. In a stupor, Mark and Chloe followed me back into the house. The warm air was a shock as we entered the kitchen, where my parents and Ethan were laughing over coffee. All settled in, dear? My mom asked without turning around. There's been a slight change in plans, I said calmly. We need to talk. My voice must have had an edge, because my mother stopped wiping the counter. Dad looked up from the sink and my brother Liam froze, a plate in his hand. What is it? Dad asked, looking from me to the shocked faces of Megan and Leo. Leo's phone buzzed again, slicing through the tension. He checked the screen, then shot me a confused look. You should take that, I said. Probably HR with a new bonus package. His eyes widened, but he answered, hitting the speaker button out of habit. Leo, it's David from the board. You see the wire? Helios Systems just acquired us. Their CEO is calling an emergency meeting with all VPs, first thing tomorrow. The rumor is she's been deep inside the company for months. Know anything? The entire kitchen fell silent. All eyes were suddenly on me. David, I'll have to call you back, Leo mumbled, ending the call. Maya, Megan began, her voice strained. What's he talking about? What's going on? I looked at them all, standing in this kitchen where I'd always felt invisible. The moment I dreaded and dreamed of for 5 years was here. I'm the founder and CEO of Helios Systems, I said calmly. And as of this morning, I own Vantage Tech. The silence was so thick you could feel it. My mother's sponge hit the floor with a soft thud. Dad just opened and closed his mouth, speechless. Liam just stood there, plate still in his hands. Megan finally broke the silence with a harsh, cynical laugh. That's not possible. Helios is a monster company. It's worth billions. Yes, I said, it is. But you never finished your degree, my father stuttered. You worked for some tiny tech company. That tiny tech company was Helios, I told him. And it hasn't been tiny for years. You're lying, Megan snapped, but I could see the doubt creeping into her expression. This is some kind of twisted prank. I just pulled out my phone and launched a secure portal to the Helios mainframe. I logged in and turned the screen around, showing them the CEO dashboard. This is our live global operations data, I said. Our current valuation is around $12 billion. We have 8,000 employees across the world, which now includes everyone at Vantage Tech. Leo started nodding his head, a look of dawning realization on his face. The new encryption standards, the server migration, the executive shakeup. That was all you. Every single move, I confirmed. But why? My mother finally choked out. Why would you hide this from us? All these years, we just thought... You thought I was failing, I cut her off. You made that obvious every chance you got. Every holiday, every phone call. We were just worried, my father insisted. We wanted you to be stable. No, I said, feeling years of frustration boil over. You wanted me to be like Megan. To live the life you planned out. When I didn't, you wrote me off. Not once did you ask what I was working on or show any real interest. That's not true, Megan interjected. I tried to help. I sent you job listings. You sent me listings for office assistants and talked down to me like I was 12. I shot back. You brought your VP to Thanksgiving and made me eat in the den so you could look good. Leo winced, suddenly looking sick. I didn't know you were in the den, he said, his voice low. I never would have agreed to that. My mother took a step toward me, her face a mixture of awe and maybe a little bit of fear. Maya, dear, if we had any idea you were so successful, we would have been right behind you. We only want you to be happy. Please, stop, I said, putting up a hand. Don't act like you would have treated me better if you knew I was rich. That honestly makes it 1,000 times worse. Silence will fill the kitchen once more. My phone started vibrating endlessly with alerts as the news spread through both companies. Outside, a light rain began to streak the windows. So, now what? Liam asked, breaking the tension. With Vantage, I mean. For most of the staff, nothing changes, I said, relieved to talk business. We're restructuring some senior management, but we aren't planning major layoffs. Megan's face turned ashen. The unspoken question was obvious. Am I out of a job? The thought just hung there. A few years ago, I might have loved having this power over my sister's future. But now, the whole thing just felt empty. No, Megan, you're not fired, I said. Your marketing work has been solid, regardless of our history. But as of next week, you'll have a new boss. Relief flooded her face, followed immediately by anxiety. Is everyone going to know we're sisters? That's your call, I said. I kept things quiet for professional reasons, not just personal ones. That privacy is over now, but we'll sort out how to manage it at the office. My dad cleared his throat, trying to reconcile who he thought I was with this new reality. Where are you living? He asked out of the blue. You always told us you had a small studio. I have a condo overlooking the park, I said, and places in London and Tokyo near our other headquarters. My mother sank into a chair at the table, looking utterly stunned. All this time, we never knew. That was the idea, I confessed. I spent years trying to get you to approve of me and then I gave up. I focused on my work instead. Leo's phone went off again. He shot me an apologetic glance and stepped out of the room. I heard his voice change, becoming the decisive executive handling a merger. Megan just looked at me as if she'd never seen me before, and in many ways I was a stranger. The box she put me in the floundering little sister was never real. I should get my things from the car, I announced, breaking the thick silence. I'll get a hotel. No, my mother cried out, jumping from her chair. You can't. It's Christmas Eve. Stay here. The irony of her frantic plea was thick enough to cut. The guest room is ready, my father said quickly. Leo can have the den? I am not putting anyone in the den, I said firmly. Not for a single night. Leo walked back into the room, putting his phone away. That was the board chairman. They've scheduled an emergency meeting for 7 a.m. tomorrow. He looked at me with newfound admiration. Your team is fast, he said. Efficiency is a core value at Helios Systems, I replied. The entire atmosphere had changed. My family looked like visitors in their own home. The dynamic that had ruled our lives for decades vanished in an instant. I need some air, Megan said, walking toward the patio door. A moment later, I followed her. A light frost was starting to cover the deck, sparkling in the porch light. Megan was leaning against the railing, her breath a cloud in the cold. Are you really keeping me on the team? She asked without turning around. Or was that just a performance for them? I stood next to her at the railing and told her I was serious. I meant it. You're good at your job, Megan. Our personal stuff doesn't change that. She nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the dark yard. I've been horrible to you. Yes, I agreed. You have. And now you're my boss. She laughed, a short, bitter sound. The irony is just, life has a strange sense of humor, I said. At last, she turned to look at me. Why didn't you ever say anything? She asked. All those years I was going on about Vantage, and you could have bought us with pocket change? Why let me look like such an idiot? I thought for a second, searching for the real reason. At first, it was about protecting the company. We were growing fast, but we were vulnerable. After that, it just became normal, and maybe part of me was waiting. Waiting for what? For any of you to actually see me, I said. To ask about my life and mean it without knowing about the money. To care about who I am, not what I'm worth. Tears started to form in Megan's eyes, something I hadn't seen since we were children. I don't even think I know how to do that. It was the most genuine thing I'd ever heard her say. I went back inside to grab my bag from the car, passing my family who were all standing around like statues. When I walked back through, Leo was collecting his coat from the guest room. I've called an Uber, he said. Figured I should probably give you all some room tonight. You don't need to go, I told him. I think it's for best, he answered with a small smile. Plus, I have about 200 emails to read before that meeting. I hear the new CEO is tough. For the first time all evening, I actually smiled. Is that the rumor? Her reputation precedes her, he said, his tone shifting. But seriously, what you've created is amazing. That data encryption protocol you designed completely reshaped the industry. I'm honestly excited to see what you have planned for Vantage. And with that unexpected vote of confidence, Leo was gone, leaving me alone with the family wreckage. The family room was completely silent. We all took our usual seats, but everything felt wrong. My parents sat in their recliners. Liam perched on the arm of the sofa. Megan was tucked into a corner chair, and I sat on the footstool. We were separated by a gulf far wider than the living room rug. Finally, my dad spoke. A global tech company. It was more of a statement than a question. But I nodded. Yes. And you built it all yourself while we had no idea. My mother's voice just faded, like she couldn't say the words. While you thought I was failing, I finished her sentence for her. Chloe stared down at her hands. Why hide it for so long? Why not just tell us? The question was simple, but the answer was a tangled mess of hurt and pride. At first, it was because I had to prove it to myself. I began. I was terrified of talking about my big plans in case I crashed and burned. But as the company grew, I realized something. You never asked about my work before. Why would money change anything? What I wanted wasn't applause for my success, but your belief in me. We always believed in you, my mother said, but her voice was paper thin. No, I said, my voice firm but low. You believed in a version of me that wasn't real, the daughter who would follow in Chloe's footsteps. When I carved my own path, you just stopped looking. My father shifted in his chair, suddenly finding the carpet fascinating. We were just worried, he mumbled. That's what parents do. I explained the line to him between being concerned and being dismissive. You never once asked to see my business plan or what my goals were. You just assumed I was playing dress-up as an entrepreneur. Leo cleared his throat. I remember you tried to tell us about your first seed funding. Mom cut you off to ask Chloe about her new Audi. My mother's face went crimson. I don't remember that, I do, Chloe said, her voice barely a whisper. I remember thinking it didn't matter because whatever Ava was doing couldn't possibly be as important as my promotion. That confession just hung there, heavy in the air between us. In all our years of rivalry, Chloe had never once admitted she actively tried to make me feel small. So what does Nexus Dynamics actually do? Leo asked, his voice full of genuine curiosity. Besides buying Momentum Corp, I mean. For the first time all night, I felt a tiny spark of hope, a real question about my work, not just my wealth. We started with next-generation cloud security, I explained. The protocols I designed became the industry standard in about 2 years. After that, we expanded into data privacy and AI applications for major corporations. Leo nodded, processing it all. So, Momentum was a strategic acquisition. Their hardware portfolio completes your software ecosystem, see? Exactly, I said, impressed he pieced it together so fast. And you built all of this without a college degree? My father asked, his tone unreadable. The skills I needed, I taught myself, I replied. For everything else, I hired people smarter than me. That's the sign of a good CEO. My mother suddenly stood and went to the kitchen. She returned holding a magazine that was buried under a stack of junk mail. The cover showed a figure in silhouette with the headline, Nexus and its Shadow CEO, Seattle's most powerful ghost. This came with the Seattle Business Journal last month, she said, her voice strained. I never made the connection. I didn't even read the article. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. Proof of my entire life's work had been sitting on their coffee table, ignored. Does this mean you're rich? My dad asked, the word clumsy in his mouth. Yes, I said, keeping it simple. Very. Chloe made a sound that was half a laugh, half a sob. All those times I offered you money to help you get back on your feet. Oh my God! You must have thought I was a pathetic joke. I wasn't laughing, I told her. Honestly, it just hurt. Being treated like a charity case while building something I was incredibly proud of. Are you going to fire me? She asked again, the fear she'd been holding back all night finally spilling out. I already told you no, I said gently. Your job is safe. Your reporting structure is just going to change. That's it. She nodded, pure relief washing over her face. I don't deserve that from you. It's not about what you deserve, I corrected her. It's business. You're excellent at your job, and our personal history has nothing to do with that. My father leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I don't know what to say, Ava. We were wrong about you. Just fundamentally wrong. It was the closest to an apology I would ever get from him. I hid the truth, I admitted. That part is on me. But we gave you a reason to, my mother said quietly. We made you feel like you had to hide your success instead of sharing it with us. A thick silence fell over the room again. You can't just undo years of family dynamics in a single conversation, no matter how honest it is. So where do we go from here? Leo finally asked, ever the pragmatist. It was the one question hanging over all of us. How do you rebuild relationships that were based on a complete lie? How do you move on when the past has been totally rewritten? I don't know, I confessed. This isn't how I ever wanted to tell you. I'm still trying to figure it all out myself. Will you stay the night? My mother asked, her voice laced with a desperate hope. Not in the garage, obviously. The guest room is ready for you. The thought of staying here, of trying to sleep under this roof with all these new emotions swirling around, was exhausting. But leaving on Thanksgiving Eve felt even more impossible. I'll stay, I decided. But I have to make a few calls first. The news is out to my executive team, and there are going to be questions. My father nodded, and for the first time, I saw genuine respect in his eyes. Of course, you have a company to run. That simple acknowledgement, something I'd craved my whole life, felt surprisingly warm. As I went to get my laptop, Chloe stood up too. Let me help you move your things to the guest room, she offered, a fragile peace offering. We walked to the garage in a tense, thick silence. The space felt colder now, the insult of the folding cot sharper than ever after tonight's revelations. I'm sorry about this, Chloe said, gesturing to the cot. It was my idea. You thought it would be funny to make me sleep in a freezing garage on Thanksgiving Eve? I asked, raising an eyebrow. To her credit, she looked genuinely ashamed. It sounds horrible when you say it like that. Because it was horrible, I said flatly. Whether I was a broke artist or a billionaire, it was a cruel thing to do. She nodded, accepting the judgment. I've spent so many years just seeing you as my competition, not my sister. I don't know how to stop. Maybe that's where we start, I suggested, picking up my duffel bag. By not competing, by trying to just be sisters. As we walked back toward the house, my phone buzzed with a text from Leo. Car's here, heading back to the city. The board is briefed and they're 100% behind you. Happy Thanksgiving, boss. The message made me smile, a small professional victory. The takeover was proceeding smoothly. Inside, my mother had made up the guest room with fresh linens and turned down the bed, her own silent form of apology. My father had a fire roaring in the hearth, trying to warm a house that had felt ice cold to me just hours ago. That night, lying in a proper bed instead of on a cot in the garage, I replayed the day's insane events. 5 years of a carefully constructed double life, demolished in a single evening. 5 years of emotional distance from my family, suddenly erased by a truth I never meant to reveal. Tomorrow would be controlled chaos, the formal announcement to all of Momentum's employees, the press releases naming me as the new CEO, the endless questions. But for now, in the quiet of the night, I felt something I hadn't expected, relief. The weight of my secret was finally gone. Whatever came next, I would face it as myself, not as two different people. Across the hall, I heard Chloe on the phone, her voice low and urgent, no doubt talking to her team at Momentum. I could hear my parents' hushed voices from their bedroom, probably grappling with the stranger their daughter had become. We were still a fractured family, but for the first time, in a very long time, we were at least looking at the same broken pieces. It wasn't forgiveness, not even close. And it wasn't really understanding either, but it was a start. Thanksgiving morning arrived with a tense quiet hanging in the air, thicker than the smell of brewing coffee. I woke up early out of habit and found my father in the kitchen, staring into his mug like it held all the answers. Happy Thanksgiving, I said, breaking the silence. He nearly jumped. Happy Thanksgiving, Ava. Can I get some of that coffee? He poured me a cup with an odd formality, as if he were serving a new business partner instead of his own daughter. Did you sleep all right? Better than I would have in the garage, I said. A small jab I couldn't resist. He actually winced. About that, it was wrong. I just want you to know, I didn't realize how cold it gets out there. It wasn't a real apology, but it was the best I was going to get, so I took it with a nod. I have to make some calls before everyone is up, I told him, glancing at my phone. The official memo goes out to all Momentum staff at 9 a.m. Of course, he said, then added awkwardly, should I give you some space? The question highlighted just how little he knew about my life. No, this is fine. I'm used to working from anywhere. He watched with a strange new fascination as I set up my laptop on the kitchen table, the same table where I'd struggled with homework as a kid. While I fired off emails and gave final approval on the press release, I could feel his eyes on me, truly seeing me work for the very first time. By 8:30, the rest of the family had trickled into the kitchen. My mother was making a big production of breakfast, whipping up pancakes that were definitely not on the original holiday menu. Chloe kept nervously checking her phone, and Leo just watched all of us, observing the fragile truce. Should we open presents now or wait until after breakfast? My mom asked, trying so hard to pretend everything was fine. After is good, I said, closing my laptop as the clock hit 9. The press release is going live right now. As if on cue, an email alert chimed on my sister Chloe's phone. She read it, her face completely unreadable, and then her eyes locked on mine. "It's done," she said. Helios Dynamics has officially acquired Summit Corp. Amelia Vance, Helios founder and CEO, will address all staff after the holidays. My parents just looked at one another, the new reality crashing down on them. "Vance," my father mumbled. "You're Amelia Vance." "Of course I am," I said. "Whatever's gone on with us, I'm still a Vance." I thought I saw a flicker of something in his expression, maybe pride. Breakfast was a tense landscape of careful small talk. Everyone was navigating years of unspoken resentment, trying to figure out the new rules. When we finally moved over to the Christmas tree, the difference was jarring. The gifts told the whole story. There were the usual, thoughtful presents for Chloe and Leo, and then the obligatory, thoughtless ones for me. A generic scarf, a drugstore bath set, a bestseller I would never read. But they weren't expecting the stack of presents I'd brought, the ones I almost left behind in the car when I nearly decided to just get a hotel room. Each one was wrapped in simple, elegant paper, holding things I had picked out for them months ago. "You brought gifts?" my mother asked, her surprise a little too loud. "Of course," I replied. "It is Christmas." I began to hand them out. For my father, a rare first edition of his favorite author, signed. For my mother, a handmade jewelry box containing a necklace from a local artist she'd once admired. For Leo, a vintage synthesizer he'd been looking for but would never splurge on. And for Chloe, a frame, original art print from a small gallery she fell in love with on a trip to Berlin last year. The pure shock on their faces as they unwrapped them was absolute. It was the clearest proof that even when they had stopped paying attention to my life, I had never stopped paying attention to theirs. "How did you know about this necklace?" my mother whispered, her fingers tracing the delicate pendant. "I think I mentioned the artist once. Ages ago. I listen," I said simply. I was always listening. My father cleared his throat, clearly touched by the book. This must have been nearly impossible to find. "Not impossible," I replied. "It just took some digging." Chloe stared at the art print. "You remembered Berlin." "You talked about that gallery for weeks when you got back," I reminded her. "You said you'd never seen colors like that before." They exchanged awkward glances, the chasm between their generic gifts and my personal ones speaking volumes. "Well, we have something else for you," my mother suddenly announced, hurrying to her bedroom. She returned, holding a small, clumsily wrapped present. "We got this morning. Your father ran to the all-night pharmacy while you were taking your calls." Inside was a cheap silver picture frame. It held a grainy printout of the Business Journal article about Helios, the one they'd ignored. "We thought, maybe you could sign it," my father said, staring at the carpet. "Since you're the mystery CEO they wrote about." It was a clumsy gesture, but it was the first time they ever truly acknowledged my work. I took it from him and managed a small smile. "Thank you." As the morning went on, something in the air really did change. My parents began asking me about Helios Dynamics, tentatively at first, then with genuine fascination as I told them the story of how I built it from nothing. My brother Leo started asking sharp questions about my growth strategy. Even Chloe, once she was reassured her job was secure, began to engage with real curiosity. "So all those times you were glued to your laptop during family stuff, you were secretly running a billion-dollar company?" Leo asked, his mind reeling. "Basically," I said. "Last Thanksgiving, I was closing a massive funding round while you all thought I was ignoring you to check sports scores." "Is that why you always had to leave parties early?" my mother asked. "Because you were working?" I took a breath, trying to choose my words carefully. The work was a big part of it, yes. But it was also because being here, it was difficult for me. "Because of how we treated you," my father stated, his directness catching me off guard. "Yes," I admitted. "It's hard to sit around for hours, feeling like the family disappointment." A heavy silence filled the room. My mother dabbed at her eyes. "I found some old photo albums," she said suddenly, pulling one from a bookshelf. "From when you were in high school, in that robotics club." She opened it to a picture of a teenage me standing with a few other kids, proudly holding a trophy from a state competition we'd won. A science fair my parents decided to skip. "You won the grand prize," she said, her finger tracing the blue ribbon in the old photograph. "I remember that. We missed it because Chloe had a soccer final the same day." "It's okay," I said on autopilot, so used to my wins being overlooked that it didn't even sting. "No, it's not," my father cut in. "We should have been there for you. One of us, at least." Chloe peered at the picture over Mom's shoulder. "I didn't know you were into all that. I was just so wrapped up in my own world." "You were taught to be," I replied, without any heat. We all played the parts our family assigned us. The conversation kept going right through lunch, slowly untangling years of crossed wires. There were no big, dramatic apologies or tear-filled hugs, just a quiet, growing awareness of the roles we had all been forced to play. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my head of communications. The press release went out. Your inbox is exploding with congratulations and interview requests. The PR team is handling everything. It's all going to plan. I passed the phone to Chloe, whose stress about the merger was written all over her face. It'll be fine, I promised her. The integration specialists will handle the heavy lifting. Your day-to-day isn't going to change that much. Except now my little sister is the CTO, she shot back with a smirk. It was the first real smile I'd seen from her in a long, long time. Well, there is that, I conceded. That evening we gathered for dinner, far more relaxed than the formal affair the night before. The conversation actually flowed, free of all the secrets and old resentments. My father asked about Helios dynamics and our future projects. My mother about my apartment in London. Leo was curious about my leadership style. And Chloe, amazingly, told stories about Summit Corp, asking for my take and closing the gap between our worlds. She admitted that launching their new data privacy platform was a complete marketing disaster. We could never make the average customer understand why they needed it. That's a classic problem in our field, I agreed. It's the trap of selling tech specs instead of human benefits. At Helios, we design everything backward. We start with what the user needs to feel, and then we build the technology to make it happen. That's brilliant, she said, and for the first time, I heard genuine professional respect in her voice. For just a second, I saw what we could have been allies instead of rivals. And I realized it wasn't too late to build that. Later, as we were all having coffee in the living room, my father finally asked the question that was hanging in the air all day. Why did you hide all this from us, Amelia? I get the business reasons for staying anonymous, but why from your own family? This was it. The real heart of the matter. The question underneath every conversation since the big reveal. I needed to see if you could love me for me, not for what I'd built, I answered honestly. I wanted to be valued for my mind, my drive, my spirit, not for my bank account or my title. And we failed you, my mother whispered. Yes, I said. Until yesterday you did. So what happens now? Leo asked. What does this mean for us? I looked around at their faces, so familiar but lit differently by this new truth between us. Now we start over, I said. Not by pretending the past didn't happen, but by refusing to let it define our future. As Christmas Day ended, I realized something. The big reveal of my secret life hadn't brought the triumphant I told you so moment I'd imagined. It created something better, something quieter, a real chance to connect. We weren't fixed. There were still years of hurt and bad habits to unlearn. But for the first time since I was a kid with a crazy dream nobody understood, I felt seen by them. Not perfectly, not completely, but truly, it was a beginning. 6 months after that game-changing Christmas, I stood on the deck of my lake house, watching my family pull up for a summer get-together. The shift in our dynamic was obvious in how easily they walked up to my home, no longer awkward or tiptoeing around me. My mom gave me a real hug, a universe away from the stiff greetings of the past. This house is gorgeous, Amelia. You have to show me every single room this time. My dad followed, holding a bottle of good scotch and a business magazine. You're on the cover again. Figured we'd add it to the collection. Since that Christmas, my parents had cleared a shelf in their study for articles and awards about my work. Their pride was finally out in the open, not just reserved for Chloe and Leo anymore. Our weekly family video calls had become a real thing. Not just duties to be checked off a list, but actual conversations. My parents now bragged about their tech genius daughter to their friends, sometimes getting a little too carried away with the details of my latest ventures. Chloe was the last to arrive, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. The acquisition had been a rough transition at first, but she finally found her place in the new company structure. Our work lives were starting to blend with our family lives, and somehow it was making both better. The design team is obsessed with the new campaign concepts, Jessica said, while we chopped vegetables for dinner. We'd never cooked together like this before. The focus groups are responding just like you said they would. Your pitch to the investors last month was incredible, I told her. It was so smart, so confident, and your numbers were solid. She beamed at the compliment. I had a great teacher. Mark walked in, laptop in hand. Got a second? I'm sketching out an idea for a sustainable fashion brand and wanted your take on the business plan. That was definitely new. It all started after Christmas, when Mark asked for my advice on his career, sparking this whole new ambition in him. I'd sort of become his unofficial mentor, and we were bonding over business plans and marketing strategies. Sitting around the patio table, I couldn't help but think how much had changed in only 6 months. It wasn't just that we were mixing work and family. It was deeper, like we were finally seeing the people we had become. I've been thinking, my dad said as we finished eating, about what you said back at Christmas, about wanting to be recognized for who you are, not just what you accomplish. I nodded, the memory of that raw conversation rushing back. I realized that's what I've always wanted too, he said. My entire identity was built on my job, on being successful. And I pushed that same pressure on all of you, especially you, Sarah, because you were the only one who ever fought back. It was probably the most honest thing my father had ever admitted to me. I think we were all caught in that same cycle, Jessica added, tying our self-worth to our achievements. I was so terrified of not being the perfect daughter anymore that I couldn't be happy for anyone else, she confessed, looking at me. Especially not for you. Because you built your success your own way, and on some level, that made me feel like I had failed. As the conversation settled into the evening air, I realized how much I had changed, too. The weight of my secret ambitions had been crushing me for years. Being honest with my family didn't just fix us, it fixed me. I stopped needing them to approve of me, and ironically, that's when they finally did. I built my own walls, but I left the gate unlocked, and that vulnerability gave me a new kind of strength. Professionally, the ripple effect was huge. Coming out as the founder of Aura Creative got a ton of media buzz, but in the end, it made our story even stronger. My own family issues inspired us to create new company policies on mental health days and non-traditional career paths. I also started mentoring young creatives from overlooked communities, especially women whose ideas deserved a real shot. That felt better than landing any client or launching any campaign. Best of all, Jessica and I had become this incredible team. Her killer marketing skills were the perfect complement to my creative vision. We'd finally gone from competitors to collaborators. Remember the garage? My mom asked, pulling me from my thoughts. The question used to make my blood boil, but this time I just smiled. It's a little hard to forget. We turned it into a proper home office for you, my dad announced, beaming with pride. For whenever you come to visit. We put in new windows, good lighting, a huge desk that looks out over the backyard. The message was crystal clear and so full of love. The place that was once my exile was now their open invitation for me to come back. That's so nice, I said, my voice thick with emotion. That's really, really nice. That night, everything felt right. I thought about how far we'd come as a family, and the road still ahead. We weren't perfect, not even close. We'd probably fall back into old patterns and hurt each other by mistake. But we were trying, we were growing, and we were finally being honest. Last Christmas was the moment everything broke open. It stripped away all our defenses and made us look at each other, really look. It was painful, yes, but it was necessary. It cleared the way for something new to take root. I learned that real success isn't about your accomplishments. It's about your connections. It takes guts to be vulnerable, to knock down your own walls. The real prize isn't what you build, but who you become along the way. As my family packed up to leave, already making plans for our next dinner, I felt a kind of peace that no career achievement had ever given me. That cold, dusty garage where I used to hide feels like a story about someone else, replaced by the warmth of knowing I belong. Have you ever felt like you had to hide a part of yourself from the people you love? What do you think would happen if they finally discovered your secret passion? I would love to hear your own stories down in those comments. And if this story connected with you, please give it a like and subscribe and share it with anyone who needs to be reminded that the people who doubt you the most are often the ones who need to see you fly.